We're rolling. Timer starts now. Mark. Hi, I'm Ford.
And I'm Sky. And these are not our real names. These are our superhero names, and with our powers combined, we formed the writing partnership L. Skyford. Welcome to Booklandia.
Today, we're going to review a book, most likely a romance. But before we get much further, did you know you can watch our faces do this episode by subscribing to us on Twitch at L. Skyford or YouTube at L.Skyford? You should really do it. We give good face.
And sometimes there's a dog bomb at Ford's house.
This is true. For our other socials, you can follow us on Twitter at SkyfordL, on Instagram at L.Skyford. And if you're interested in our book, blog, or even more book reviews, head over to our website, lskyford.com.
Lastly, this and every episode are chock full of oversharing and spoilers, and every episode is rated E for explicit. You have been warned.
Hi!
Hello!
It's
Nicole,
always...
you got so big!
I know, it's always helpful when I push the wrong buttons. Have I warned you about this? I push the wrong buttons a lot. Half of our podcasts are about my wrong buttons.
And the other half is about our transitions.
True that I'm constantly not able to deliver on. So basically, I'm an excellent operator, you guys. Hire me for your next event.
What you're here for and what we're all here for is this beautiful, lovely person, Nicole Knudsen, who is the voice and the words and the production and you're just like, you do all the things for this creepy, artsy, beautiful podcast, the Godfrey Audio Guide. So thank you for coming to our Booklandia.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for having me. And yes, I do all of the things. As I like to say, I am the wearer of many hats when it comes to that show. So many hats.
I didn't prep you for this, but do you want to tell the people a little bit more about the Godfrey Audio Guide?
Sure.
If not, I can do
it. No, it's as Ford said, it is a fiction podcast. The conceit of the show is that it is the audio tour for a fictional museum called the Godfrey Estate and Museum, and it blends both real art history and art history that I've made up or have tweaked, and it's sometimes spooky, sometimes silly. Mm-hmm. There's some cosmic horror thrown in for spice. It's a little hard to describe, but the episodes are only about 10 minutes each on average. You can blow through it really easily if you like spooky things, if you like art, if you like weird offbeat comedy. It's there. Go listen.
There's absolutely something for everyone, and I'm a lover of art. And especially art museums, they have a really special place in my heart. And so it's delightful. I binge it like chunks at a time, and I feel like I texted you and was like, this episode was amazing. Like, just incredible things. So
I think you did.
I love it. I love it so much. I'm your biggest fan.
Nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's so nice.
Yeah, so we've brought you here today because we usually talk about books, and you very graciously agreed to read a book with us, and we chose a spooky art book. The portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I can never remember.
It's the picture of Dorian Gray, but it is a portrait though. So it's, but I'd say it's arguably one of the most famous pieces of art in literary scopes. So yeah, I've only read this once before, and I was in high school, and it was kind of eye-opening to read it again.
Yeah, I haven't. This was my first time reading it, but I come from the theatrical side of Oscar Wilde, where Importance of Being Earnest is one of my favorite plays. So I've known him from that. So I had a little bit of idea of what to expect, but I my expectations were not met in many different ways. It's very unexpected.
Well, I should tell you then that I'm doing The Importance of Being Earnest this next spring, so I'm expecting you to attend.
1 ticket, please.
How exciting.
Dunzo. Yes, for those of you who are listening and not watching us, here is the cover. It is terrifying, honestly. There is a person who kind of looks like Jekyll and Hyde. One side of their face is blonde-haired and blue-eyed and subjectively attractive, I guess. And the other half is withered and gray, and I mean that literally, in a green waistcoat and a blue jabot.
Oh!
Hey, I had to have taken costume history for something.
Later, you're gonna have to explain the difference between a jabot and a cravat.
You know what? I actually, as I said it, I was like, this is a cravat, not a jabot, but I've already committed to the jabot. We'll go with it. It is a cravat. There's a pin in it.
Okay.
Offline, I will diagram this. Sorry. All right. So, Nicole, here's a fun thing that we do here on Booklandia is we write a 30-second explanation of the plot of the book that we read to try to catch our listeners up. And then whichever one of us did not write the copy attempts to read it in 30 seconds with the timer ticking behind us. And I know we didn't tell you about this, but can we put you on the spot and make you read this?
Absolutely.
Also, huge caveat, I wrote this and it has a lot of curse words in it.
I mean, I'm here for it. There is no swearing on the Godfrey, but that is because I try to make it sound like an actual museum audio guide. That's literally the only reason.
There is a lot of swearing on Booklandia.
Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of fucking swearing. I assume like if one day the Godfrey audio guide just starts to evolve into a sentient being or loses its mind, perhaps that like tasteful swearing can happen.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway.
So sorry. So I'm gonna count you in from 3, and then you will see a timer come up and you will hear some ticking noises, and that's to propel you forward. No pressure, but 30 seconds on the clock. 3, 2, 1.
Dorian Gray wishes on a completed painting of himself to always be young and handsome, and it is so. As he grows older and becomes an asshole, at the influence of a French novel, only the painting shows the wear on his body. This is obviously a mindfuck for Dorian. This book is a classic and the only novel to be written by Oscar Wilde. The preface of the book is an artistic manifesto, and fuck you to the British press who called it immoral.
Whoa!
Well done! Plenty of time
left
left over. There he goes. Sorry, we should have warned you that this is a thing we do to all of our guests and to each other, actually.
We've consented to it. So
we agreed. Yes, we agreed beforehand, and you did not. So I have not read this book in high school. I feel like we maybe had like a choice in which book to read, and this was not a choice I made. And I'm a little bit glad that that's the case, because I think I would have had really strong negative emotions towards this book. And as is, you will discover that I did not adore what's happening.
Yeah.
I was also so I have the physical book, but I also listened to it on audio. So I do want to give a shout out to LA Public Library and the Libby app for allowing me to double speed that audio, because without it, I would have been asleep a lot more frequently.
So I
Libby.
did a bit of history research.
So much.
Oh, yes. What did we do before Libby? We had Overdrive. We still have Overdrive.
We had Overdrive.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did a little bit of research, historical research, because I needed to know if this book was written before or after he went to jail for being gay. Because this book is gay.
It is so
like,
gay. which is something that I missed in high school, and I have no idea how. Like, I have no idea. There's literally a scene where Basil confesses to Dorian that he doesn't actually say I'm in love with you, but like he says I'm in love with you without actually saying those words. He says every other word except for those.
Yeah, and they're often like lounging around all day drinking together, and I'm like, yeah, they just got out of bed. That's Ave Maria. So in my research, I have come up. So this book was originally published in 1890 as a short story, and then he expanded it into a full novel in 1891. So for the short story publication, the editor actually cut out a bunch of stuff without telling him, and a lot of it was the much more explicitly gay stuff, and the fact that they had Dorian had sexual relationships. So they like flatlined all the good stuff, if you will. And then for the novel, he expanded on the like artistic parts. Like he just expanded it all. And then it was 5 years later when he went to jail. And he only wrote one book after that because jail really fucked him up. So that is a short history of Oscar Wilde.
Excellent. So short history of me going to the internet is that very recently there was on YouTube I think like quarantine very recently, there was a theater company in Britain that did this show with a like twist where it was like he was an internet celebrity and Stephen Fry, who played Oscar Wilde in the Oscar Wilde movie, was a guest appearance in the show as himself or as Oscar Wilde.
Oh,
but
okay.
as Stephen Fry, but with the affectations of Oscar. It's very meta. It was very interesting. I was like, where can I see this? This seems amazing. We're gonna sort of talk about it's later in our questions, but this book has really strong correlations to influencer culture and what is considered to be appropriate societal behavior and what inappropriate societal behavior people still get famous and infamous for, because apparently 1890 and 2021 are basically the same year. We still shame people for their sexuality or for their choices to or not to marry. And we still rely heavily on what Instagram tells us is cool.
Yeah. What club you go to.
Right. But by the way, gross.
Yeah. I feel like we're jumping deep into questions, but like that's something that I had the thought of as I was reading it, because the term that Wilde uses to describe like a lot of the relationships between the main characters is having influence upon someone else. And the fact that we have the term influencer, like I couldn't get that out of my head. And that's a huge part of it, is the desire to have influence upon and effect upon other people, which was fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, this feels like it kind of ties in with my later question. Do we want to go out of order?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, do it. I just read my first question and hard pass on that question. Just like scrap it already.
So, I got really mad about this book because I felt that Dorian never changed. He always blamed everything he did on someone else's influence on him, or the fact that Lord Henry loaned him that French book, that book that made him a bad boy. And like, I guess, do you think he changed over the book, or do you agree with me and think that he never changed and he was always the same?
I agree. I don't think there might be. I think the moment that could have elicited change is literally the very end, when I think he finally sees himself for who he is. Yes, he's been watching the portrait age and become this decrepit, like monstrous thing, but I don't think he even, and this ties into one of my questions as well, of like, I don't think he even knows himself as well as you know, he thinks he does. And then the book is over and he doesn't change.
Right. Like, look, we told you, spoiler alerts. He fucking murders somebody and has another guy melt the body with acid, and then the guy who destroys the body kills himself, but that's not his fault. He did the killing of himself. That suicide is on that guy's soul, not Dorian's soul. Like,
Yeah.
the fucking cojones on that asshole.
I mean, yeah. But it's Max, again, bringing it back to our influencers, it's Max heavily of millennials. And like, I realize this brings on the hate, and I got it. I feel it. But I don't know, man. It's not my fault. Yeah. Like, whatever, I'm just gonna go to Cancun. Is literally a thing he says, except he goes to a small village instead of Cancun, right? But like, he's like, oh shit, someone died. I'm just gonna go to this village and hook up with this village lady.
To defend the honor of millennials, of which I am one, I would say that yes, but particularly affluent, well-off people. Because Dorian has never had to work a day in his life. He's just so fucking loaded, and he just does whatever because he's so fucking bored all the time.
He's a yacht
he faces no consequences for anything. Yeah.
I mean,
gets high on opium and goes to his yacht.
Yeah, I do think that there is a commentary about the wealth imbalance in England at the time. And now, I mean, I know Oscar Wilde is long gone, so obviously he didn't predict this, but boy, did he predict this. This isn't one of my questions, but maybe it's one of my questions.
Going off script?
Sorry, but is the book, the French book, meant to be a comparison to this book? Like, is us reading this book a thing? So this is it is in my question, because the quote that I highlighted was, the book that the world claims immoral are books that show the world its own shame. So it does talk about like whether or not it sort of talks to the point that we should all hold a mirror to ourselves and really examine ourselves from a morality standpoint. But I also feel like in that moment, Oscar Wilde is saying, this book, the book you're reading, is going to be called immoral, or has in fact already been called immoral as a short story, right? And it's because it's just showing you what you don't want to hear about. And the book that entices him, the French book that entices him, is a book that makes him be his, I'm putting this in quotes, darkest self, also known as a bisexual heathen who just sleeps with people for pleasure, which is basically what the book is advertising. Like, it's like, get it on, but get a portrait that takes all your sins first.
Yeah. So in my research, that book is a real book, and it's called A Retour. And I forget who wrote it, but it's essentially about a guy who just goes on an impulse binge. And like, I didn't really go down. I was like, this doesn't interest me. I'm not going to read the whole wiki page, but that's the
okay.
short
So
bit of it.
That's okay. So then that book isn't, so scrap that part of my theory. But is Oscar Wilde saying that his book is the immoral book he's referring to in the immoral books that show us our darkest secrets?
I feel like, I mean, Oscar Wilde was a very smart person. I feel like he knew that comparison would be made. He had to have known. And just with the commentary of, I'm sure some of his, I know particularly Dorian Gray, but I'm sure other stuff that he had written and put out as well, like, you know, got him on the, was it called the blacklist back then? Anyway, whatever the equivalent was in Victorian England. yeah, there had to have been some awareness. I feel like he was too aware of the times to not know.
Yeah, he's kind of like the pop culture Andy Cohen, maybe, of that time. Just like, look at the terrible shit that's happening now. Watch what happens when we put this mirror up to society and all the shit that rich people get away with. Even though I always have this impression that he is fairly affluent. Maybe that's just how all the depictions of him, the picture on your book cover, Nicole, and the paintings of him portray him as affluent. But yeah, maybe he's just a poor theater kid like the rest of us.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Someone who knows more about Oscar Wilde. We came unprepared.
Yeah. I read a Wikipedia page, people.
Sorry. I feel underprepared for this.
I did no homework at all, apart from reading the book.
Excellent.
You read the book!
We showed up perfectly well. All right. Can I go off script one more time?
What? Twice in one episode?
I know. I'm sorry. It's a whole thing. Okay, so it's in none of our questions, which is why I want to go off script here. But can we just address the fucking misogyny? Just like,
please.
Women are a decorative sex that is just to be worn for a while. There is one character at the end, the Duchess at the end, who is cleverer than all of them. I was like, all right, you got that one character, but can we please not smear shit all over your wives and girlfriends? Please and thank you. Like, women are so disposable in this story, and I know that Oscar Wilde was trying to talk about gay men, and I don't want to take away from that conversation by being like, but women, but also, but women.
I think I definitely, that was definitely a sore thumb sticking out of this book, but I also think it was always coming from people who are morally reprehensible. Like, you weren't supposed to be agreeing with these people. So I was able to kind of get past those sentiments because of that. But yeah, it's awful. How women are described in this book are awful. It's awful. It's horrible.
I want to read some master's paper on Lord Henry's wife, because they have this open marriage where he's like, she fucks around, I fuck around, we're cool about it. And then later she fucking leaves him for someone else. Like, that bitch is awesome. I stand.
And she meets Dorian when Dorian is living in their house, and she's like, cool. Who are you into this week? Because this is who I'm dining. I'm putting that air quotes and winky faces. Dining.
Oh, I bet she's dining.
Oh,
on someone.
That went places unexpectedly.
It's a romance podcast. We should have expected it.
True that. Okay.
Yeah.
So my caveat, my 2 cents is just try not to read into the depiction of women in this book.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how it is, or even was. That's just not. End of sentence.
Yeah, toxic masculinity existed in 1890. We've learned.
Triple check on that. Yes. All right. Should we get back on script?
Please and thank you.
So I'm gonna skip my question.
We even?
Do you want to start at the top, or do you want to?
Sure. Oh yeah. Okay. Great. Have you ever felt destined to know somebody? Because when Basil always describes having been destined to meet Dorian, and Dorian was like, I was destined to meet Lord Henry.
I'm sorry, did you say Basil?
Basil. I'm American. It's basil. You put it on your pasta.
See, I literally had this conversation the other day of like, to me, basil is the plant, basil is the name.
No, I know. I'm aware.
Oh,
It just comes out. When I read it, it's Basil. So it comes out Basil. And then when people say Basil, I go, right. Oh, right. Okay. So Basil.
very good. So Basil.
Basil.
Nicole, I
Basil
feel like this question should go to you. For I have had multiple conversations on this podcast about fate and destiny and what our thoughts are. And
I love it.
it's mostly a yay. Yes, we're on board with fate and destiny. So what are your thoughts?
Sorry, can you read the question one more time?
Yeah. Have you ever felt destined to know somebody?
Yes, but it's always, and this might be part of the question, like what prompted this, but it's always in hindsight. It's less a feeling of like, oh, we were meant to know each other, but it feels like we've known each other forever. Like my partner James and I, we talk about like we've been together for 3.5 years now, but we both joke, but we've been together for 30 years, right? Like it's that weird period of time where it's, most of my life I haven't known you, but it doesn't feel that way. So I agree in that sense of there are people that you meet, and there are other folks in my life who I have like similar things of, some people have always been in my life, or some people are more recent to come into, my life. But yeah, I think that there are people who you just get. I don't think that's the relationship depicted in this book, but I agree with that sentiment.
Yeah. I get kind of a premonition when I first meet somebody, and so it's whether or not I choose to follow the premonition. So I have those senses, and I get it's maybe more of that sort of, they were destined to meet each other, like the sparks of the first meeting and the way you kind of feel in, well, not for me, but they felt in lust with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Gay.
Let's see. Oh, look, it's my question next. If
It
we want to
is.
keep moving down.
Sure.
So no explanation is ever given for why the portrait starts changing instead of Dorian. Why do you think it specifically begins after his rejection of Sybil Vane?
So this is my biggest complaint about the book, is that it doesn't pick a lane. Are you a fantasy book and like the devil accepted your bargain, or are you a gothic horror, which also again the devil accepted your bargain? Like, I wanted more why there, but I guess it makes it more fucking terrifying that anytime you wish in front of a new painting, your soul could be taken. So
yeah, I would argue that the cruel turn of the mouth, which is what happens after the rejection of Sybil, is just the most noticeable change. And that prior to that, because what I noticed was that, so his picture is painted, and then all of this other stuff happens for quite a few pages of the book, and then he meets up with Basil, and they discuss the passage of time, and it's actually only been a year, right, between when, or it's been a fairly short amount of time in terms of one's facial expression changing. And so not until later in the book does it skip decades. But originally it's only a couple of months. So you wouldn't really notice a couple of months worth of like laugh lines unless you did something really specific. So I think that that's just the first big thing. But for me, it's been changing the whole time, and he just finally noticed because he's so self-absorbed that he wasn't looking.
Could it be Oscar Wilde's cynicism about love? Because he never notices the portrait in love with Sybil Vane. He only notices when he breaks her heart and the turn of the mouth. So is it?
Yeah, I wonder.
It only reflects the bad parts.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, is that maybe it isn't so much his age that gets reflected, though that is true. I wonder if it's more a physical manifestation of his moral failings. Because that line, the cruel turn of the mouth, which is how it's described, it made me think of the line in A Streetcar Named Desire, deliberate cruelty is not forgivable. And I wonder if it has something to do with like those specific actions, like actions that are not forgivable. If it's not so, it is as much his action and the cruelty of it as it is the effect on the other person. Maybe it's something that they can't come back from.
I mean,
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that, because when like the red mist that appears after the murder and the redder still mist that appears after the suicide are all manifestations of the things he's done and not of his actual age. So yeah, it is definitely the things that weigh heavily on the soul rather than the things that age our outer skin, which in itself is sort of a commentary, right? Like whether or not beauty is skin deep, or if the experience of years is actually not a bad thing if they're experienced in a way that is not morally reprehensible. And I do not mean that being queer is morally reprehensible. That's totally not at all. That's not what I'm saying. But murdering people, hard yes. Definitely reprehensible.
Driving people to suicide, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Getting all your friends hooked on opium.
Yeah, probably reprehensible, yeah.
Yeah, not great. I was going to say something and now I forgot.
Sorry.
Never mind. It's okay. Not big.
Nicole, we're back to a question of yours, I think.
Yeah, because we've gone
yours
out of
again.
order.
Let me go back to that. We're just jumping all over the place.
Yep.
Oh God, so I don't need to read this whole intro to this that I wrote. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but apart from Dorian himself, which character do you think has the clearest sense of who Dorian actually is?
So I read this ahead of time and I was like, that is really deep and I have no idea. I wanted to say Basil, but Basil is really surprised when he sees the portrait. He has an idea of having possibly done something to the portrait to imbue it with magical properties, but he's still really surprised at what he sees. It's maybe Lord Henry, but like in a callous way. He might see it, but he then brushes it off. So is it his valet, the original one that gets married? Oh, I see Ford nodding vigorously to this. You think it's the valet?
Absolutely. The French valet absolutely knows all his shit.
Wait, is it the housekeeper with the keys? Because she has the keys. She's there the whole time because the French valet leaves midway through. He marries and bounces.
I would also make an argument for his friend he meets in the opium den, because obviously they've smoked dope together.
Well, they also had a sexual relationship, and that's why the friend is in the opium den, because he's been disowned for his adventure.
Proclivities.
Yeah. When I was writing that question, I think I had Lord Henry in mind, and mostly because at the very end, when Dorian is saying, he had started romancing this country girl and he broke it off to spare her. And he sees Dorian's hypocrisy before Dorian does. And even, where was it? This is now flipping all the way to the front of the book. This is before anything has really happened. But it's after the portrait has been completed. And Henry is saying, his outlandish, contrary things. And Basil says, oh, don't say that in front of Dorian. Which one? The one in the painting or the one pouring tea? So I think even then there is, and I mean, this is also just Oscar Wilde foreshadowing shit. But I think there is an awareness that like this picture of perfection isn't a real person.
Yeah.
And that Dorian is far more complex. And also Henry is aware of the influence that he has on Dorian, because of course he knows. course he knows.
But he chooses to be willfully ignorant of all of the gossip and the bullshit about Dorian. Like, he's his only constant friend, so he has to be aware of some of this shit, but also doesn't take any of the onus on himself.
Yeah. I don't know that he's willfully ignorant. I think he is very excited to be friends with an outcast of society, right? Like, it's one more feather in his cap of like disreputable people he knows. And
that feels very
I think
Oscar
he
Wilde.
knows. Yeah, I think he knows and just doesn't care.
Or he cares in that way where he's like, I know a bad person, right? Or I know a person who does bad things, or whatever it might be. Which is why Lord Henry is the one that suggests that, like, wouldn't it be great if I knew someone who was a murderer? Because I think he just like has like a checklist of cool people to know, even if it's mental, to be like, oh, I don't have a murderer on my checklist. I should really get on that.
Gross.
Yeah, they're all gross. So gross.
Gross.
They're all so gross. But like, I always thought of Lord Henry as being less evil than Dorian, but maybe not. Maybe I'm not. Like, this is the kind of shit this book has me thinking about, is degrees of badness.
So I think Lord Henry is the more complicated evil. Dorian is influenced significantly, first by the portrait's power, then by the book, at all times by Lord Henry, and by all the people that come into his life. So he's a follower at his core. He is not a creator, and though he does create his own fate and ultimately make some choices, all of his choices are made based on what he thinks other people will interpret it as. Whereas Lord Henry just tells you what he thinks you should do. So one of them's the devil and the other one's just Beelzebub.
Shit. Wow. Let's just end the whole episode right here.
Done. Done. I've sorted it out.
You've sorted it out. Because this is a romance podcast, I'm going to do this romance quote. So I pulled a quote. I pulled two, but I'm choosing one. So, and I would like to know if you agree or if you have any additional thoughts on this Organization of Words by Oscar Wilde, which says, when one is in love, one always begins by deceiving oneself, and one always ends by deceiving others. That is what the world calls a romance.
He can go fuck himself.
Yeah, that's not true. It's
so
just not true.
Let me tell you a little story. So when I started dating Finn, on our first date, we're like, so are you interested in marriage? Do you want to have children? And at the time I was like, yeah, I definitely want to get married. I'm interested in having children. Well, flash forward 10 years and I've changed my mind and I no longer want to have children. So I started off by deceiving myself because I thought at that time I wanted to have children, because that's what a woman does in a relationship to keep a man. And now in our relationship, that toxicity happened, y'all. But like, I had some really fucked up ideals that I've had to break apart. And then now we're in this relationship and there won't be any children. And he's fine with that. But it was kind of a 1-2 punch. So in some way I deceived him.
My argument there would be the counter to that, actually, insofar as you evolved as a human, which we, giant surprise, do at all times, right? With every day, we change based on our environment. So the thing that you did, which is extraordinary, is that you were honest about your actual needs as opposed to your presupposed by society needs. And you expressed your needs, and lo and behold, in a healthy relationship, your partner went, oh, I can develop new feelings about these new needs because, again, evolution is literally how we're not dead. Right?
No, I completely agree. Completely agree. But it's perspective, right? And that's kind
I
of
don't
the
know. I agree with
nuance of this
everything that
question.
Sky just said. So
Oh, okay. But
So
okay.
no, I mean the way I read this is I read it in the original 1890 variation, whereas there are corsets and teeters behind the fan and pure virginal glove wearing, and then there is fuckery at all times, and then at some point maybe you find out that you got married just because she thought you were old enough to croak, right? So
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
at all what you're suggesting. What you're suggesting is an honest conversation between two partners, which in case listeners, if you're not doing this, do it now. Like right this second. Pause, go tell your significant other what you're thinking, and then unpause. Come back.
Yeah, exactly. There's another element to this question where you can apply it to romance novels, because I feel like deception is a very common trope in romance novels, whether you're fake dating or whether you're a pretend royalty or you're pretending not to be a werewolf.
Rar.
Rar. So deception is what the romance world calls romance. Just saying, Oscar Wilde nailed romance novels, I think, a little bit there.
I feel like hate mail's coming our way. We're good with it.
Great. To the rack with us.
Exactly. That's 15th century. You went way back. This is more of a to the tower with us and no pudding for tea time.
Damn it. What is tea time without a Battenberg? Did I go too far forward this time?
Okay. You know what? I've lost the thread. You're good. You're good, though.
Great.
Your point carries that, yes, there is a lot of deception in romance novels, but I hope that it is presented with a wink wink so that we as a reader understand that this is play acting. So I feel like basically the entire world wants to be play acting, and some of us get the opportunity to actually do it. And we feel so much more Juliet about it than everybody else, and sometimes Desdemona.
Holy shit. Lord. All right, Nicole, would you like to close us out? Last question of part 1 before our
Yes. So, this is also in relation to a quote. Many characters in the novel buy into the notion that youth is the only thing worth having. Thoughts?
Have I mentioned they can go fuck themselves?
Fuck everyone.
Yep. The reason I bring it up, because yes, that is absolutely untrue, but I think that so much of certainly Western society wants us to believe that that is true still, even now. And no. No.
Yeah. This makes me wonder, since you first read this book in high school?
Yes.
And then you've read it now, how does that youth and your current youth, like, how do those two read-throughs of it, have they changed, and do you have a different opinion of this thought?
I mean, honestly, I can't really remember what I thought of it in high school. I clearly purchased this copy. I own it. And like I was looking through like the underlinings that I had done and just thinking, why did I underline this for so much of it? Why this line?
There was an assignment you were fulfilling.
Yes. But I can't really speak to what my thoughts were back then when I was, 16, 17, however old I was. But now, as someone who I just turned 30, and you couldn't pay me to go back to being a teenager. Like, you couldn't pay me to go back to being the age that Dorian is at the beginning of this book. Like, I am so much happier with who I am and where I am in my life now than I was, just even a few years ago. And so, no. And I think that that's the point that, or a point that Oscar Wilde is trying to make, that as much as society would have you believe that youth is the only thing that matters, if you're lucky, you won't stay youthful forever. You will age out of it. Like, that's the best thing that can happen to you, is a long life, you know? So, heartily disagree.
Agree. The power of the soul and like being a good person trumps being a young, beautiful person in the end for Dorian, I think. And also, like, I wonder if like average mortality rates of the 1890s maybe also had a part in this. I bet folks didn't live much after 50.
That's probably true. That's probably accurate.
That's fair.
I mean, what's the quote? Live something, something, and leave a beautiful corpse. Is like, it feels like that vibe.
Yes. And on that delightful and beautiful corpse note, we're going to take a break.
Okay, we're going to take an intermission right here. When we come back, we're going to break down our favorite moment from the book.
And discuss our ratings and if this book made us want to get naked.
Please enjoy this message from one of our friends in the podcasting world.
All right. And we're back. And we
Hello.
are... Hi.
Hello.
I realized that at the very beginning of the episode, we did not... I did not put up our Sky and Ford signage to introduce us. So in case you're confused, hold up. There they are. We are Sky and Ford, and we are back talking about the picture of Dorian Gray with the showrunner and the voice of the Godfrey audio guide. Nicole, welcome back. We are
Good
back
to be back.
We're back for the second half of this episode, and this is where we get into the most compelling part of this book, in case you found any parts compelling, and hot take. And also, we have to ask whether or not any parts of this book made you want to get naked, because we're on a Booklandia podcast and we ask every time.
Only if you consent to answer, no pressure.
Oh, yes, no pressure. Absolutely no pressure. True that. Thank you for that. All right, so compelling moment or favorite moment in the book. For me, and truly one of the only moments that I'm like, yay, joyful moment. Very early on in the book, Dorian feels overwhelmed by what's happening to him, and he has to go outside, and he sticks his face into a blooming lilac bush, and smells the lilacs to come back to his senses. And I viscerally connected to that for a variety of reasons. When I was growing up, there was a lilac bush by my grandma's apartment building, and so the smell of lilacs literally takes me back to my childhood, but also the sense of connecting with the idea of connecting with your senses as a way of grounding yourself is something that I do very frequently as a person with ADD who needs a tactile response. So I was like, yes, I do that. I'm with that. So that was my favorite part of the entire book.
Yeah. For me, I wrote when it got good. So,
which is when?
After that really long fucking middle chapter where it describes every single thing Dorian collected and read in 2 decades and like fucking types of fabric. And I knew, Sky, that you were like, oh, a brocade, tell me more. And I was like, fuck it, fuck everything, fuck this whole chapter.
There was a lot of about Japanese embroidery. Agreed. It was very specific.
And like reliquary, like Catholic reliquary, I did not care. And then right after that, the book got good. Like action started happening.
So when it got action packed, you liked the action packed part.
I'm gonna say it. This book was probably better as a short story.
I mean, it had more sex and fewer brocades. So yeah, I'm with you.
One can assume.
One would
right. Hope.
Yeah. How about you, Nicole? Compelling or favorite moment?
This was interesting because it was something that at first annoyed me, but then became something that I really enjoyed, and wholeheartedly agree about that chapter just detailing Dorian's hobbies throughout 20 years. This is a sidebar, but it reminded me so much of in what is it, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. There's like a whole chapter that's just describing the layout of Paris from the top of the cathedral, like an entire chapter. And like, I know you got paid by the word, man's gotta hustle, but like, I don't need to read this. Anyway, getting back on topic, I think my favorite detail was the fact that we don't, and again, I first hated this, but then really appreciated it from like a character building perspective, was the fact that we don't get too much information about Dorian's exploits, at least as far as like the lives that he's ruined. You get some names, you get a few kind of tidbits of what happened. And I think that is way more evocative of showing just how callous and how, you know, uncaring Dorian is this string of people whose lives he's ruined. Some of whom, you know, are now destitute, some of whom are dead because they killed themselves because of whatever he and Dorian got up to. And I was trying to think of like, if we had taken the time, if this was like a longer novel, because it's not very long, it's like maybe 200 pages. If we had taken the time to like see all of that, I don't know that it would have been as effective. And I know part of that was just you couldn't actually show gay relationships, healthy or unhealthy, during this time. But I think about that a lot, of like, it makes me wonder what happened. And I still think about it. So that was my most compelling like character detail.
I think if he had showed that to us, we'd all want to kill ourselves. I think this book would be really depressing. I mean, more depressing than it kind of is, because it would just be another laundry list chapter of all these people that Dorian affected and doesn't give a shit about, doesn't blame himself for his actions.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also really great in keeping with the fact that for the most part, we see the book from Dorian's perspective. There are a few breaks in that POV, but they're just kind of throwaway lines, like the you know, Ford, I think you mentioned this earlier, the acquaintance he has who is a doctor who he blackmails into disposing of Basil's body. It's mentioned a few chapters later that he's killed himself.
Yeah.
And like that's it. And it's mentioned once and then you move on. And yeah, that I hate Dorian, but I love that detail.
Yeah. It's significant because it's just this person and this person and this woman and this woman, and, you know, like, consequences.
I believe that is the whole point of this book. Consequences.
Yeah.
If I were to be a high school literature teacher, that, and I would start a private Instagram account with the hashtag, what did Dorian do?
Excellent. Yep. All kinds of memes. It's a meme.
Exactly.
IG. Okay, great.
Yes.
Yes. Let's talk about our hot takes.
So I hated 210 pages of this book. And then the last 19 pages, I was like, oh, you're not just telling a story. This is a commentary on British society at the time and how much they hate you, Oscar Wilde, and how much this, like, I underlined only things in the last 10 pages. And that's where the quote about art and how art is significant or insignificant, depending on who you ask, is. And so up until that point, I was like, why, for fuck's sake, am I reading a story about a completely deranged person who's been subverted into doing horrible things and all of the people who suffer at their hands? And then I got to the last 10 pages and I was like, oh, copy that.
Cool.
It's an allegory. Gotcha.
It was a rough road, but it was for a reason.
It was for a reason. I feel like if I read this at 17, this would be a book I'd throw across the room when I got to the bit where I was like, I've been played. It's an allegory.
Amazing. I came into this book thinking it was going to be a full-on gothic horror, and it ended up being a treatise on morality and immorality and all, an allegory. And I felt like I'd been hoodwinked, duped. Duped by a playwright. So,
yeah, my hot take, which we've kind of talked about already, it is a blistering commentary on taking things at face value, and particularly the society in which Oscar Wilde was a part of. And I so desperately I wish that Oscar Wilde could eviscerate social media culture and influencer culture. Like, I want to transplant Oscar Wilde from the past into the present and just have, okay, it sounds like that one production that you mentioned at the top, Sky, of like a modern day thing. Like, I want a modern interpretation of Dorian Gray, and it has to be about an influencer. It has to be. That's what I want.
Yeah.
That's my hot
Their
take.
profile pic or something. Yeah. Amazing. All right. Did this book make us want to get naked?
So my answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
you go.
Okay. I mean, definitely not. Definitely not. Definitely not. I will not do it in a lilac bush. I will not do it on your Catholic reliquary. And I will not do it in your locked room with your creepy painting.
That is specific. Very specific definitions of where not to do it. My answer was yes, it did want to make me get naked, but only to genuinely showcase all the years that are very clearly depicted on my body, proudly so, because I have made it to, this is a conversation you and I had earlier when you're like, what's my age again? I've proudly made it to 38, and like, I love all the bits and pieces that make that up. And so this book that is like 17 is the best, I'm like, check out an extra 20 on that. It's brilliant. Let's keep going.
My answer is no. In fact, quite the opposite, because there are so many lavish descriptions of like them getting dressed up to like go to dinner, go to the theater, and fuck everyone in this book, but like I would raid their wardrobe and get dressed up to go to the theater. So it made me want to get dressed up fancy.
Nice. Put more clothes on.
Put more clothes on. The opposite
so
of what
many
we
layers.
want on this podcast. Excellent. Well, I want to thank you very much, Nicole, for making me read this book. I mean, like, I volunteered, but like, I wouldn't have gone here without you. Thank you for your podcast, which is a joy and a thing of beauty that brings voice and representation to some of the characters that aren't typically in a museum. So thank you for shining a light on people in the arts that actually existed at all times but don't get mentioned. And everyone go check out the Godfrey audio guide. Catch up before the next season starts.
Yeah, it'll be coming
we'll put
out
links
soon. Soonish. The fall sometime. The fall.
Yes, beautiful. We'll put links in our bio.
Thank you so much. I do my best to make it as, for all of the horror shows that can exist at the Godfrey, I try to make the actual environment of like seeing the art to be as inclusive and equitable as possible. So thank you so much for saying that.
Oh, I mean, the bathrooms changing their own gender is the exact tone of inclusivity. If you needed to know anything about the Godfrey, the bathrooms choose their own gender.
In fact, they reject gender. Spoiler alert. They refuse to have gendered signs on them and spit them out.
As you should.
Delightful.
Bathrooms. As you should.
Example.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. So are you, dear audience human, going to pick up this book now that you've heard our review? Let us know in the comments. Have a suggestion for another review? slide on into our DMs.